The Pacific Ocean, summer 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, and the tides of war are shifting. An American victory at Midway has stripped Japan of its dominance of the waves. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers lie at the bottom of the ocean. The Imperial Navy, once the terror of the Pacific, has been dealt a blow from which it will never fully recover. For the first time since that terrible Sunday morning in Hawaii, the momentum belongs to the United States. But this epic war for supremacy in the Pacific is far from over. In fact, it is only just beginning. What lies ahead will be a campaign unlike anything in the history of warfare, a grinding, brutal advance across thousands of miles of open ocean, fought on coral atolls and volcanic islands that most Americans have never heard of. It will be a campaign defined by terrifying fanaticism on one side and extraordinary personal heroism on the other. It will test the endurance of every single man who fights it, and it will force the United States to answer a question that, in the summer of 1942, no one yet knows the answer to: does America have what it takes to endure and win? Because the enemy they are about to face will not behave like any enemy they have ever encountered. This is not the war in Europe, where armies clash across open fields and defeated soldiers raise white flags. In the Pacific, the rules are different. Here, surrender is not an option. Here, the fighting does not stop until one side is dead. And the Americans are about to discover that truth in the most violent way imaginable. The footage that survives from those years is haunting. Grainy, sun-bleached images of young Marines wading through chest-deep surf. Rare color film shot by the troops themselves, capturing moments of chaos and courage that official cameras never reached. Put together for the first time, these fragments tell a story that statistics alone never could. The human reality of what it meant to fight Japan, island by island, all the way across the Pacific. To understand what was about to unfold, you have to understand what Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor failed to accomplish. By the summer of 1942, it is clear that Japan's attempt at knocking America out of the war has failed. The sleeping giant is awake, the industrial machine is churning, and the United States' victory at the Battle of Midway has enabled America to assert dominance at sea. It is a shift in power that has the United States ready to strike back at Japan's empire. The question is where to begin. U.S. military planners, led by Army Chief of Staff George C. Marshall, identify Japan's Achilles heel: a complete lack of natural resources. Japan has no oil of its own, no rubber, no tin. It is an industrial nation built on borrowed time, dependent on imports for the very materials that keep its war machine running. And that is precisely why Japan has seized all those territories around the Pacific Malaya for its rubber, the Dutch East Indies for its oil, the Philippines for their strategic position to create an empire that can supply the oil, rubber, tin, and food essential for maintaining the war effort. Cut off these resources, and Japan will fall. It is that simple, and it is that difficult. The problem is that Japanese Commander General Hideki Tojo knows it too. He understands perfectly well that those supply lines are the lifeblood of his empire. And so he has built a defensive ring of steel around Japan's territories, a vast chain of island bases stretching across the Pacific, complete with troops, ships, and aircraft, all positioned to protect Japan's vital supply routes. These islands are fortified, garrisoned, and supplied, and every single one of them will have to be taken. Taking them will demand more than American naval superiority. It will mean driving the Japanese from their bases across the ocean, island by island, beach by beach, and that will require an entirely new form of warfare: the amphibious landing, the art of projecting military force from the sea onto a hostile shore. America has never attempted anything like this before. No modern military has, at this scale. But U.S. chiefs believe there is no alternative to the island-hopping strategy, and so they devise a plan that will attack along 2 fronts. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet, will seize key strategic Japanese bases in the Central Pacific, pushing along the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands. Meanwhile, General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific, will take New Guinea and the Solomon Islands to the south of Japan's empire. 2 prongs. One objective: mainland Japan. Fortunately for MacArthur, allies stationed on New Guinea have prevented Japan from seizing the entire island. The Japanese had invaded New Guinea in March of 1942, But they came up against Australia's forces. With the help of the native Papuans, the Australians fought back against Japan's South Seas forces and retained an important base at Port Moresby. That base would now provide the United States with a foothold from which to launch their offensive. And MacArthur's first target was a tiny island on the southern tip of the Solomon Islands, the very bottom of Japan's defensive ring. Its name was Guadalcanal. The offensive opens with shelling by U.S. warships. B-17s from the 26th Squadron rained down destruction for 7 straight days, hammering Japanese positions until the island smolders under a blanket of smoke and dust. Only when Japan's defenses have been softened up does MacArthur launch the first land-based assault. United States Marines are going into amphibious combat for the very first time. Low light and heavy clouds allow the approaching landing craft to go undetected. Wave after wave of Marines pour onto the beaches. Everything is going like clockwork. The plans, the rehearsals, the naval bombardment, it is all paying off. But as they press up the beach, the Japanese are waiting. Japan's garrison fights back with shocking ferocity. The 1st and 11th Marine Corps pound the enemy defenses with howitzers, but it is not enough. They are forced to get in close. And it is here, in the brutal intimacy of close combat, that the Americans make a discovery that will define the entire war in the Pacific. The Japanese are driven by a code of honor, a code that dictates it is better to die in battle or even to commit suicide than to surrender. What the Americans quickly discover is that this means they are in for a fight to the death every single time. Within hours, 10,000 U.S. troops reach land, outnumbering the enemy 5-1. As more heavy artillery and tank support arrives, MacArthur's optimism grows that he has the Japanese outgunned and outnumbered. Japan's 2,000-strong garrison is quickly overwhelmed. By 8 o'clock that evening, after just 14 hours of fighting, American troops secure their main objective, an airstrip on the north of the island. MacArthur now has an air base from which to support his advance on Japan's island empire. But his control over the island is far from secure. 12 days later, Japan mounts a counterattack. A wave of 1,000 soldiers from their nearby island stronghold of Rabaul lands on Guadalcanal under cover of darkness. They come ashore at night, moving silently through the jungle. And when they strike hard. American forces stand firm. Almost all of the Japanese who attack are killed, but they keep on coming. It does not matter how many fall. The reinforcements keep arriving. Wave after wave of Japanese soldiers pour onto the island, each one met with American fire, each one pressing forward regardless of the cost. It is as if they do not fear death, and the truth is, many of them do not. The fighting continues for 6 agonizing months. 6 months on a jungle island crawling with insects and disease, where the heat never breaks and the rain turns everything to mud. 6 months of patrols through undergrowth so thick you cannot see the man next to you. 6 months of night attacks, of mortar fire, of the constant gnawing fear that the next moment could be your last. It is a war of attrition in its purest and most terrible form, and when it finally ends, the toll is staggering. All remaining Japanese forces are evacuated from Guadalcanal by February the 7th, 1943. The battle for this one tiny island, an island that most Americans could not have found on a map 6 months earlier, costs the United States 7,100 lives. Japan's losses are a staggering 24,000. 24,000 men, dead on an island barely 90 miles long. The ratio tells its own story. The Japanese would rather die than retreat, rather die than surrender, rather die than admit defeat. Guadalcanal offers a bitter taste of the war of attrition that is to come. Every island from here to Tokyo will exact its toll. Every beach will be contested. Every victory will be measured not just in territory gained, but in the terrible arithmetic of lives spent. But Guadalcanal also provides something essential, a key foothold on the edge of the Japanese Empire. A secure airfield, a launch pad for MacArthur to start island hopping his way toward the ultimate goal, mainland Japan. The road is long, the cost will be high, but the first step has been taken. February 1943. With Guadalcanal under their control, U.S. chiefs can now begin the process of cutting Japan off from its supply of natural resources. The next target is Rabaul, on the island of New Britain. From Rabaul, Japan provides air and naval support to its supply routes across the southern Pacific. It is a fortress, and it is the key to Japan's grip on the region. But MacArthur's plan is not to capture Rabaul head-on. Instead, he intends to isolate it, cut it off, and it will cease to pose any military threat. The operation is codenamed Cartwheel, and it is ambitious in its scope. MacArthur will encircle Rabaul with a pincer maneuver. He himself will lead the western pincer from Port Moresby, pushing up the Japanese-occupied northern coast of New Guinea. The eastern pincer, commanded by Admiral William Bull Halsey, will start from Guadalcanal and move north through the Japanese-controlled Solomon Islands. From these 2 points, the U.S. Navy can complete the encirclement and strangle Rabaul into irrelevance. As with Guadalcanal, Cartwheel begins with intense aerial bombardment and shelling. American bombers plaster the target islands for days before the landing craft go in. Then the Marine and Army units assault the beaches, but this time, the Japanese are ready. They unleash heavy mortar, sniper, and machine gun fire from the moment the Americans hit the shore. The sand erupts around the landing troops. Men fall before they take 3 steps. As the U.S. presses inland, leaving the relative exposure of the beach for the claustrophobic darkness of the jungle, Japanese resistance becomes even stronger. The enemy are well dug in, concealed in a network of pillboxes, caves, and underground bunkers that have been prepared for months. Some of these positions are virtually invisible until you are standing on top of them. American forces have to get in close dangerously, terrifyingly close a task for grenades and flamethrowers. The flamethrower operators, in particular, bear an extraordinary burden. They carry pressurized tanks of jellied gasoline on their backs, making them prime targets for enemy snipers. They advance toward bunker openings and send streams of liquid fire into the darkness. It is medieval in its horror, and it is the only way to clear these positions. Still, even in the face of flamethrowers and overwhelming numbers, the Japanese soldiers stay true to the samurai code of honor. Rather than surrender, they mount suicide charges, screaming "Banzai," a word meaning 10,000 years, a wish for the emperor's eternal reign as they rush headlong into American gunfire with bayonets fixed. Some tie grenades to their bodies and throw themselves into groups of American soldiers. Every island, every ridge, every stretch of jungle becomes a killing ground. There is no safe ground. There is no rear area. There is only the relentless, grinding advance through an enemy that will not stop. But as the combat continues, U.S. troops face a new enemy, one that no amount of firepower can defeat. The jungle terrain on these islands is riddled with disease. Soldiers fall prey to dysentery, scrub typhus, and worst of all, malaria. The heat is suffocating. The humidity rots everything: boots, clothing, morale. In fact, across the entire war in the Pacific, malaria claims more American casualties than the Japanese do. It is a grim irony. The land itself is trying to kill them. But despite the appalling jungle conditions, the U.S. advantage in numbers tips the balance. Japanese fanatical bravery is no match for America's military might. Its industrial capacity to produce ships and planes and tanks faster than Japan can produce soldiers to destroy them. It is a war of math as much as courage, and the math is relentless. It takes 9 bloody months of conflict, but eventually the 2 pincers of Operation Cartwheel close around Rabaul like the jaws of a vice. American casualties run into the tens of thousands killed, wounded, and felled by the jungle itself. But the Japanese losses are almost beyond comprehension. More than 150,000 killed. 150,000. It is a number that speaks to the absolute refusal of Japanese forces to withdraw, to retreat, to live, to fight another day. They stay and they die, every one of them. Operation Cartwheel has done its job. Rabaul, along with its garrison of over 100,000 men, is now isolated, cut off from supply, cut off from reinforcement, cut off from relevance. It will play no further part in the war. The 100,000 Japanese soldiers marooned there will spend the remainder of the conflict growing their own food and waiting for a rescue that will never come. Meanwhile, vital resources, including oil from the Dutch East Indies and rubber from New Guinea, are successfully cut off from mainland Japan. The noose is tightening, and the United States is learning, with each island and each campaign, how to fight this new kind of war. Meanwhile, to the east, Admiral Chester Nimitz and the U.S. fleet are preparing to attack Japan's empire on a second front. Operation Galvanic aims to drive the Japanese off the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. These outposts provide vital military support to Japan's supply routes in the Central Pacific, and the campaign's first target is the island of Tarawa. It starts with by now tried and tested tactics: a naval and air bombardment from the Fifth Fleet, meant to pound the island into submission before a single Marine sets foot on the beach. The shelling is enormous. Ships lined up on the horizon pour fire onto a spit of land barely 2 miles long. Surely, the commanders reason, nothing can survive this. Then the 2nd Marine Division heads for the shore. But this time, America's lack of experience in amphibious warfare is exposed in the cruelest possible way. The troops land at low tide. The water is shallow, far shallower than anyone anticipated. Intelligence had failed to account for the reef that surrounds Tarawa, a shelf of jagged coral that sits just below the surface at low water. The landing craft grind to a halt on the reef, hundreds of yards from shore. They cannot go forward, they cannot go back, and the Marines inside know that staying put means death. They are forced to leave their boats and wade in, with water up to their waists and sometimes their chests, razor-sharp coral reefs slicing their boots and legs, completely exposed to enemy fire from the island. Japanese machine guns open up from fortified bunkers along the shoreline. Hundreds of Marines are cut down before they ever reach dry land. Some drown, pulled under by the weight of their equipment. The water around them turns red. It is a catastrophe, and the battle has barely started. Those who make it to the beach find themselves pinned down behind a seawall barely 4 feet high. In front of them, Japanese positions bristle with guns. Behind them, the lagoon is full of their dead and wounded comrades. There is nowhere to go but forward. Meanwhile, the bulk of Japan's 4,700-strong garrison is waiting inland. They have survived the naval bombardment. Their bunkers, built from reinforced concrete and coconut logs packed with sand, have absorbed the shelling that was supposed to destroy them. They are outnumbered by the invading Americans, 7-1, but every one of them is ready to die for their emperor. They have been told that surrender is not an option, that death in battle is the highest honor a soldier can achieve. Their extreme dedication transforms the next 4 days into some of the fiercest and bloodiest fighting in Marine Corps history. Every single pillbox has to be taken with grenades and flamethrowers. Every trench is a fight to the death. Every position is held until the last defender falls. The Marines advance in increments measured in yards, sometimes in feet, each foot paid for in blood. By the time the island of Tarawa is secure, 1,700 American lives have been lost in just 96 hours. And out of the entire Japanese garrison, 4,700 men, only 17 allow themselves to be captured alive. 17 out of nearly 5,000. The rest choose death over surrender. They fight until they are killed, or they take their own lives when the position is lost. It is a statistic that sends a chill through every American commander who reads it, because it confirms what Guadalcanal suggested. This enemy will not stop, will not yield, will not negotiate. The only way to take an island held by Japanese forces is to kill virtually every defender on it. And there are hundreds more islands to go. But the Japanese are unable to halt the American charge. Nimitz's forces continue to steam north. By February the 22nd, he has seized all the key targets in the Gilbert and Marshall Islands. The Central Pacific is opening up, and U.S. forces now have their sights set on the next prize to the north, the Japanese-controlled Mariana Islands. Admiral Chester Nimitz and his naval task force launch Operation Forager. The first target, the Mariana Island of Saipan. 165,000 shells are fired at Japan's defenses in a bombardment that turns the island's coastline into a moonscape of shattered concrete and splintered palm trees. 2 days later, the amphibious landings begin. 8,000 Marines of the 2nd and 4th Divisions are ashore by early morning. The fighting follows a by-now familiar pattern: fierce resistance from entrenched Japanese defenders. Every yard of ground contested, every position taken at a cost. But this time, the Japanese have a surprise. They do not just have ground troops in the fight. They call up their navy. A huge carrier fleet, including 5 fleet carriers and 4 light carriers, advances into the Philippine Sea. The aim is to cut the U.S. troops on Saipan off from their supporting ships and turn the tide of the battle. It is a bold gamble, but there is a fatal flaw in the Japanese plan. Most of their experienced pilots were lost at the Battle of Midway. The men climbing into those cockpits are rookies. A first wave of just 61 Zero fighters takes off from the Japanese carriers. They climb into the Pacific sky, their engines straining, their pilots gripping the controls with white knuckles. Nimitz scrambles 220 F-6F Hellcat fighters to intercept. These are America's most advanced fighter planes, faster, more heavily armed, and better armored than anything the Japanese can put in the air. Their pilots are battle-hardened veterans who have been flying combat missions for months, men who know their aircraft inside out and who have faced Japanese fighters before and won. Against them, the Japanese rookies have barely enough experience to maintain formation, let alone survive a dogfight. It is men against boys, and the result is a massacre. Outnumbered and outgunned, Japan's Zeros are mercilessly blasted from the sky. Hellcats swoop through the Japanese formations like hawks through a flock of sparrows. The Japanese launch another wing of 120 aircraft, desperately hoping that sheer numbers will overwhelm the American defenses. They do not. And then another 47 Japanese planes take off, and they too are torn apart. Wave after wave, each one met with the same devastating result. The Pacific sky becomes a graveyard of falling aircraft, trails of smoke and fire streaking toward the ocean below. By nightfall, U.S. losses stand at just 29 planes. Japan's losses are almost 400 aircraft, along with the irreplaceable pilots who flew them. The American pilots, maintaining their dark humor even amid the carnage, give the battle a name that will stick: the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The nickname is grimly apt. At sea level, the battle is just as one-sided. U.S. submarines torpedo and sink 2 Japanese aircraft carriers. In less than 24 hours, the Imperial Japanese fleet is routed. They lose 3 carriers, and almost 600 aircraft in total. This crushing blow means that Japan can no longer compete in carrier-based warfare. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is an important American victory and a catastrophe for the Imperial Navy. Back on Saipan, the conflict plummets to new depths of horror. But it is not the banzai charges that shock the U.S. troops. It is something far worse. It is the suicidal fanaticism of the 8,000 Japanese civilians on the island. American soldiers watch in horror as men, women, and even children walk to the edge of the island's cliffs and jump. Entire families, holding hands, mothers clutching their infants, elderly couples who have lived their whole lives on this island, choosing to end those lives rather than face what they have been told the Americans will do to them. They leap to their deaths on the rocks and the crashing waves below. Some hesitate at the edge, and Japanese soldiers behind them push them forward. Others go willingly, even eagerly, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. U.S. troops shout through loudspeakers, begging them to stop. They plead in Japanese. They promise safety, food, medical care. But the propaganda has done its work. The civilians have been told that the Americans are savages, that capture means torture and dishonor, that death is the only honorable path, and so they jump. Some throw themselves into the sea instead. The Marines can do nothing but watch as hundreds of civilians perish before their eyes. The cliffs where this happened would later be named Suicide Cliff and Banzai Cliff. They stand as memorials to this day, monuments not to courage, but to the terrible power of ideology over human instinct. The message to America is chillingly clear. To beat Japan, the United States will not just have to overcome a vast army. They will have to overcome an entire nation that will never surrender. Men, women, children, all of them prepared to die rather than submit. It is a realization that changes the calculus of the entire war. How can you defeat an enemy that simply will not back down? How do you bring peace to a people who have been taught that peace is dishonor? These are the questions that haunt the American command as the summer of 1944 wears on, and no one has a good answer. Summer 1944. America is winning the war in the Pacific. Island by island, base by base, Japan's empire is being rolled back. The defensive ring of steel that Tojo built is cracking, but the cost in human life is horrifying. U.S. losses stand at around 46,000 men dead, not just wounded. 46,000 families who have received the telegram they dreaded. 46,000 empty chairs at dinner tables across America. Japan's losses are massive, over 300,000. And mainland Japan itself is beginning to feel the squeeze. Deprived of natural resources by the American advance, the Japanese war effort is faltering. Food is in short supply. Japan's agricultural and transport infrastructures are disintegrating under the strain. Factories that once churned out aircraft and munitions are running short of raw materials. Ordinary Japanese civilians are going hungry. And yet, despite all of this, the war seems no nearer to ending. Japan shows no sign of surrendering, no sign of negotiating, no sign of anything other than absolute, total, unwavering resistance. This is the paradox that American leaders now face. They are clearly winning, but they have no idea how to finish. In the U.S. High Command, an argument is underway that will shape the rest of the war. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King argues that the war could be brought to a swift end by moving the fleet west from the Marianas to the island of Formosa, modern-day Taiwan. From Formosa, Japan's home islands would be within easy striking range of U.S. heavy bombers. King's plan is bold and efficient. It would mean bypassing most of the remaining Japanese bases across the Pacific, leaving them undefeated but isolated, withering on the vine while American bombers pound the Japanese homeland into submission. General MacArthur has other ideas. The U.S. Supreme Commander in Southeast Asia makes his case directly to President Roosevelt, arguing passionately that America must continue with his island-hopping strategy. In particular, he insists the United States must drive the Japanese off the Philippines. This approach, he argues, will provide bigger and better-equipped bases than Formosa from which to launch bombing raids and consolidate America's stranglehold on Japan. The Philippines offer harbors, airfields, and infrastructure that a small island like Formosa simply cannot match. But there is something else driving MacArthur, something deeply personal. When he was driven off the Philippines by the Japanese in December of 1941, forced to flee under cover of darkness while his men fought on without him, he had made a promise. Standing on the dock in Australia, he had looked at the cameras and said 3 words that would follow him for the rest of the war: "I shall return." He had promised the Filipino people that he would come back for them. And Douglas MacArthur, whatever his flaws, is a man who means to keep his promises. On July the 26th, 1944, President Roosevelt backs MacArthur's plan. It is a decision that will prove fateful for hundreds of thousands of people. As preparations for the campaign begin, MacArthur deliberates where to make his first assault. He targets the island of Leyte in the southern Philippines. The general launches amphibious landings, and ever the expert in public relations is filmed striding ashore with his troops, showing the folks back home that he has indeed returned. It is a moment crafted for the cameras, but the symbolism is real. MacArthur is back. By now, America is accomplished at amphibious landings. Within hours, the Sixth Army establishes an 18-mile-long beachhead from which to begin their advance inland. But the Japanese High Command know they have to try something different to break the cycle of American success. They gamble everything and mobilize all their remaining major naval vessels. They call it Operation Show, meaning victory. The plan is audacious: lure America's naval support away from the ground troops on Leyte, then destroy the unprotected landing force. The Imperial fleet is split into 3. One convoy advances through the San Bernardino Straits to the north, another pushes through the Surigao Straits to the south, and the third Japanese convoy, including the Imperial Navy's last 4 aircraft carriers, approaches the Philippines from the northeast. The carriers are the bait. On October the 23rd, the northern convoy of Operation Show is spotted. Admiral Halsey, commander of the 3rd Fleet, intercepts. The following morning, he scrambles aircraft to attack the Japanese convoy. The Japanese come under fire but then turn and retreat. It is a trick designed to lead Halsey on, and he takes the bait, heading straight toward the Japanese carriers to the northeast and away from Leyte. Meanwhile, to the south, Admiral Kinkaid heads out to intercept the 2nd Japanese convoy approaching through the Surigao Straits. Japan's plan is working. Just a few U.S. vessels remain to support the landing on Leyte. Now, under the cover of darkness, the Japanese fleet that had appeared to retreat turns back to attack the handful of American ships still covering the beachhead. This could be the victory that Japan so desperately needs, but at the last moment they lose their nerve. Fearing they are sailing into a trap, the Japanese turn again and retreat. The opportunity is lost. It is a decision that will haunt the Imperial Navy forever. In the Surigao Straits, Admiral Kinkaid and the U.S. 7th Fleet unleash hell on Japan's southern convoy. 3 Japanese destroyers and 2 battleships are sunk. To the northeast, Admiral Halsey and the 3rd Fleet reach the 4 remaining Japanese carriers. Having lost most of their aircraft and pilots in the Marianas, Japan's carriers are sitting ducks. All four are sunk. The Battle of Leyte Gulf is the largest naval engagement in history, and it should be the final knockout blow against the Japanese Imperial Navy. But Japan believes it can still strike back against the U.S. fleet, and it does so with a terrifying tactic that takes its fanaticism to a whole new level. The Imperial High Command calls for volunteers to form a new aerial strike force. They are called kamikaze, meaning divine wind, and they are required to make the ultimate sacrifice in the name of their emperor. In the fall of 1944, the first kamikaze pilots drink sake in a solemn ceremony before climbing into their aircraft, each one laden with fuel and explosives. They wear white headbands emblazoned with the rising sun. Some write final letters to their parents. Others sit in quiet meditation. They are, for the most part, young men, boys, really barely out of their teens, and they know they will not be coming back. Their targets are America's aircraft carriers and warships supporting the troops on Leyte. They will use their planes as guided missiles, diving them straight into the decks of American ships. U.S. fighters and anti-aircraft guns respond to the threat. The sky over the Philippine Sea erupts in tracers and flak. Some kamikazes are blown apart before they reach their targets, trailing smoke and flame as they spiral into the ocean. Others miss, clipping masts or splashing into the water alongside their targets in plumes of spray. But a direct hit is devastating. When a kamikaze strikes a ship, the combined force of the aircraft, its fuel, and its explosives creates an inferno. The escort carrier St. Lo takes a direct hit and sinks, killing 100 Americans. It is a new kind of terror, an enemy who turns himself into a weapon, who considers his own death not a tragedy, but a triumph. For the American sailors who witness these attacks, the psychological impact is immense. There is something deeply unsettling about an enemy who flies straight at you and does not flinch, does not swerve, does not try to escape. The kamikazes ask a question that haunts every man on those ships. What do you do against someone who wants to die? How do you defend against a weapon that has already accepted its own destruction? As horrific as these attacks are, they are not enough to turn the tide of the war. Out of some 2,600 kamikaze sorties over the course of the campaign, only 19% hit their targets, sinking fewer than 40 U.S. ships. The kamikazes are terrifying. They are tragic, but they are not decisive. They change the nature of the fear, but they do not change the outcome. Back on Leyte, ground forces face off against Japanese defenses across the island. The terrain is brutally difficult: mountains, dense jungle, rivers swollen by seasonal rains that turn roads into rivers of mud. Attritional warfare continues for 2 solid months. The Japanese fight from prepared positions in the highlands, launching counterattacks at night, infiltrating American lines, making every advance a grinding, exhausting ordeal. Supplies have to be carried by hand through mud that sucks the boots off men's feet. The wounded have to be carried out the same way. But once again, Japan's determination is no match for America's sheer weight in numbers. The Japanese on Leyte are outnumbered 4-1, and their supply lines have been severed by the destruction of the Imperial Navy. On New Year's Eve, 1944, General MacArthur's men finally capture Leyte. The campaign is declared over. Almost the entire Japanese force of 50,000 lies dead. 50,000 men who fought to the bitter end, who held their positions until they were overrun, who charged into American machine guns rather than wave a white flag. The island is taken. The cost is paid, and now MacArthur can turn his attention to the main prize, the Philippine island of Luzon, the heart of the archipelago, and the gateway to Manila. Early in the new year, over 100,000 troops of the 6th Army Division land on the south coast of Luzon. The landings are relatively unopposed. The Japanese garrison is poorly equipped and is no longer receiving air or naval support or reinforcements from Japan. They are no match for America. Forced to fall back to mountain strongholds, the Japanese retreat inland. As U.S. reinforcements pour onto Luzon, MacArthur heads straight for the capital, Manila. After just 2 weeks of close-quarter combat, his troops are just 60 kilometers from the city. They retake the major U.S. airbase of Clark Field, which had fallen to Japan in 1941. With Manila in his sights, it looks as if General Douglas MacArthur is about to make good on his promise to liberate the Philippines. The 1st Cavalry Division takes the bridge over the Tullahan River, and on February the 3rd, the U.S. enters the capital city of Manila. But what awaits them is not the jubilant liberation they expect. It is a nightmare. The Japanese hold Manila's historic architecture in high esteem. To preserve it, General Yamashita gives orders to withdraw completely from the city. It is, by the brutal standards of this war, a humane decision. But a garrison commander named Sanji Iwabuchi defies the order. Along with 20,000 men, Iwabuchi swears to uphold the Japanese imperial code of honor and defend the city to the death. What follows is the first and fiercest example of urban warfare in the Pacific Theater. American soldiers inch through the capital block by block, room by room. Every intersection is a potential kill zone. Every window might conceal a sniper. They face machine gun nests set up in government buildings, hidden artillery pieces positioned in parks and plazas, and booby traps wired to doorways and furniture. The Japanese defenders know this city, and they use every inch of it. The historic city of Manila, once called the Pearl of the Orient, is reduced to rubble. Beautiful colonial churches, grand government buildings, centuries of Spanish and American architecture, all of it ground to dust in the fighting. What bombs and shells do not destroy, fires consume. Block after block burns, and with it, the lives of the Filipino civilians trapped inside. For the people of Manila, this is a nightmare beyond comprehension. They are caught between two armies, and neither side can protect them from the violence. Japanese soldiers, knowing they are going to die, commit atrocities against the civilian population. Men are bayoneted. Women are assaulted. Entire neighborhoods are set ablaze with their residents still inside. It is a rampage of destruction that defies military logic. It serves no strategic purpose. It is simply the rage of men who know they are doomed, turned upon the helpless. After a month of fighting, U.S. forces drive Iwabuchi and his remaining troops into the historic center of the city, known as Intramuros. The ancient walled city, built by the Spanish 400 years earlier, becomes the site of their last stand. American soldiers unleash a 140-gun artillery barrage on the stronghold. The walls that had stood for centuries crumble under the onslaught. U.S. troops then assault the position. The battle is brutal, lasting 3 days, hand-to-hand fighting in the ruins. Every doorway a potential ambush, every pile of rubble hiding a defender. And then, at dawn on the 26th, Iwabuchi and his officers commit seppuku, the Japanese act of ceremonial suicide. Rather than surrender, they take their own lives. The battle for Manila is finally over by March the 3rd. American losses stand at 1,000, Japan's at 17,000, but it is the third number that haunts everyone who was there. Over 100,000 Filipino civilians lie dead. Many of them were not killed by American bombs or Japanese bullets. They were massacred by the Japanese. It is the highest death toll of any battle in the Pacific Theater. MacArthur has kept his promise to return, but the price is devastating beyond measure. The battle for the Philippines will continue for 5 more months after the fall of Manila, as the U.S. is forced to weed out pockets of Japanese defenders dotted around the islands, holdouts in the mountains, snipers in the jungle, soldiers who will not quit. When it is finally over, the Philippine campaign has cost America around 14,000 dead, and almost 50,000 wounded. Japan has lost almost 350,000 soldiers' lives. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Strategically, the campaign has been a success. Japan's navy has been crushed. Its last supply lines to sources of oil and food have been severed. The empire that Tojo built to sustain the war effort is crumbling. But everyone on both sides knows the war is far from over. The Japanese believe they can still win, not through naval superiority that is gone, not through air power that too has been shattered. If they can just fight on whatever the cost, they are convinced that America will not have the stomach to continue. U.S. chiefs know this too. They need to find a way to force Japan to surrender quickly and unconditionally. But how?